Hey everyone, welcome to this week's edition of A Thoughtful Bro. Hold on, let me get my mic closer to my mouth here. We are live streaming on A Mighty Blaze on Facebook, Twitter, and YouTube. Welcome everybody. I'm here with the fabulous Ryan North. We're going to talk about this amazing, hilarious book. It's like the second week in a row I've done a really funny, fun book, and I'm so excited about it. A few words before we get started. Thoughtful Bro is here every Tuesday at 2 to talk about what makes great books tick, what makes great authors tick. Mighty Blaze is an all-volunteer initiative to help writers reach readers during COVID and beyond. At A Mighty Blaze, we're not asking for your money, and if you want to support us or show the love, just give us a like, give us a follow on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, or YouTube. Or you can go to amightyblaze.com and sign up for our weekly newsletter, via which you will get an update every Sunday night about all the upcoming interviews we have that week and all the different shows that you love besides The Thoughtful Bro. What else? We don't, as I said, ask for any money, but if you are, in fact, in the mood to throw around a little cash, please spend it on hilarious tongue-in-cheek guides about how to become a supervillain, guides which may also just sneakily be the most thought-provoking science books you've ever read. Books like How to Take Over the World by Ryan North. If you are wanting to ask a question, just pop it in the chat. It will make its way to me. And then one last thing before we get started about what's coming up. That's a hilarious comment.
Thanks, Cookie.
Thank you, Cookie. That was really funny. So one last thing before we get started, a few teasers for next week. It's a big week next week. So Emily St. John Mandel, who is the author of Station 11, she'll be on to talk about her new book called Sea of Tranquility. That's a week from today at 2 o'clock. Then 2 days later on Thursday at 4 o'clock Eastern time, we'll have on Pulitzer Prize winner and author of Visit from the Goon Squad, Jennifer Egan, and she's going to be talking about her new book called The Candy House. So that's it for next week. Please come join us then. As for today, Ryan North is the New York Times best-selling and Eisner-winning writer whose recent work includes How to Invent Everything. He published the graphic novel adaptation of Kurt Vonnegut's Slaughterhouse-Five, a book that I loved and which was my first introduction to Ryan's work. He also wrote the Unbeatable Squirrel Girl series for Marvel. Ryan loves time travel, and in a possibly related development, he has twice collaborated with William Shakespeare on a choose-your-own-adventure style version of a couple of his plays. He lives in Toronto, where he writes for video games, television, and has a long-running webcomic series called Dinosaur Comics. His latest book is How to Take Over the World, Practical Schemes and Scientific Solutions for the Aspiring Supervillain. His qualifications for this book include being a self-described trained scientist and professional villainous scheme creator. In its review, Bookpage said, quote, "If anyone is going to be a reliable source for dastardly plots bolstered by plausible plans, it's Ryan North." And I think that is a compliment. Ryan, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me. Happy to be here.
This is great. So this is not a live contest of who can grow out their hair more in COVID. If that was the case, if it were, Ryan would have a big lead. But Ryan, this is so great. I love the book so much. I was literally laughing out loud. I have so many great things to say about this book, but it was just such a treat. But I actually want to start on a different book of yours, which is, as I mentioned before, this Slaughterhouse-Five adaptation. And I just want to say, I have like a sort of thing for classics that become graphic novels, like 1984. Look at this, The Epic of Gilgamesh graphic novel.
Very nice.
The Action Bible. I mean, if you want to spice up your spiritual reading, the Illustrated Mahabharata. The list goes on.
Incredible.
But I love that kind of format, and I actually just wanted to ask you about that. Like, I know you have your whole career is sort of like combining images and words, but like, what is it about that format that allows you to revitalize a classic or just kind of get the message across in that style?
Yeah, I mean, it was absolutely terrifying to do a Kurt Vonnegut book as a graphic novel because I am a huge fan of Kurt Vonnegut's work, and I didn't want to be the person who screwed up Kurt Vonnegut, who did the bad version of Slaughterhouse-Five. But the nice thing about that project, Albert Montes, the artist, did an incredible job. And my whole idea with it was, if you're going to do a graphic novel version of a piece of literature, a piece of prose, then I wanted it to exist as a comic, as if you had never heard of Kurt Vonnegut and you'd never heard of Slaughterhouse-Five, you'd pick up this book and you'd finish it and say, what a good graphic novel or what a good comic, but you wouldn't say, what a good adaptation of a previous prose book. So anywhere that I could find what I called comic tricks, things that I could communicate the text through a technique that was indigenous to the medium and not just taking, narration from the book and putting it in a narration balloon and saying, there, I've written a comic, was something that I was looking for, and it worked out well. And the nice thing with Slaughterhouse-Five in particular is that it's a story that is hopping around through time, and in prose, that's hard to get across because you have to describe what's happening. But in comics, you can get it across almost effortlessly. Just the clothing people are wearing, the coloring can tell you what time period in, whether you're in World War II or the 60s or the 40s or the future. Like it's so easy to get that across with just the images that it made it feel like almost it had been intended as a graphic novel. In my head, I imagined that I was an editor and I had commissioned Kurt Vonnegut to write a comic book for me, and he turned in this prose book, and I was like, oh, Kurt, now I have to fix this for you. You did good work here. There's some great, this is incredible, but this is not what I ordered. So I got to play the role of adapter/editor in my head.
Well, it really is wonderful. And it's like, when I put the pieces together with this new book, I mean, Vonnegut is such a great comp for you, I think, because the prose is just so funny and so inventive, and quirky is often a word that's used to describe your work. And as with Vonnegut, and just one quick other thought, just about what a graphic novel can do. Like, here's a page, this is the Tralfamadorian, language, so to speak. And it's like actually a language of like only images. And like these images are just beautiful. And like, so that's like an area where you had a lot of space to interpret.
Yeah. Well, in the prose novel, he describes the Tralfamadorian language as being, this book as being a series of urgently described images that you see all at once. And I was like, Kurt, that's a comic. Like, you can take this and make it a double page spread and just have the image of all these images. You're taking them all at once. There's no sequence to them. Right. But together they add up to more than the sum of their parts. The realization that what Kurt was describing was the visual language of words and pictures in deliberate sequence really made that spread feel like, yes, of course, this is the only way you can do this, because this feels like comics from day one. The other trick we did was Kilgore Trout in the book is described as a failed science fiction novelist. We just moved him even more down market and had him writing comics. So we got to actually see these Kilgore Trout comics as fully realized golden age, silver age types of EC kind of morality tales.
Right. Yeah. Oh, it's so great. It's so great. It sounds like it really became a thing in and of itself. But let's talk about how to take over the world. So first I want to say, one of the things I see myself in the long term being indebted to you about is the introduction of a new word to my vocabulary, turbo chump. And so I was so obsessed with this word turbo chump that I looked it up, and it's actually it's not in wide circulation, it appears, at least from what I could find on the internet. I'm just wondering, first, what is a turbo chump? And second, is this kind of in your circles, is this a common term and I just am missing out?
Oh, I mean, a turbo chump is clearly a chump taken to a turbo degree. I feel like that's obvious. But I feel like the origin of that is I did comics for the TV show Adventure Time. Yeah. And Adventure Time, like my friends, would be inventive with language and make things up, and taking a prefix to an existing derogatory term is a classic way to do it. I do love the idea of a turbo chump. I feel like I would like to meet a turbo chump.
Right. It just, I couldn't stop thinking about it. It just had this kind of memic hold on my brain. But anyway, all right, moving on. This book, it's like How to Invent Everything, which we're going to put a link to the TED Talk you did for the last book, which is about how to invent everything. Is your time machine breaks down and you're caught in the past in a pre-civilization area, and how would you kind of create civilization from scratch? And spoiler alert, written language is a big thing in that. But here we are again with a kind of like fake how-to book, and I'm just wondering, like, what is it about the kind of fake how-to book that like appeals to you?
Yeah, I love it. I love it because it feels like you're breaking the rules. When you're writing nonfiction, you're not supposed to put fiction in there because it, in theory, is hard to tease them apart. But what I
Right.
found when writing How to Invent Everything was the fiction around it. This idea that you've gone back in time, your time machine's broken, you crack open the repair guide, and it says you can't fix this time. Time machines are way too hard. You're never going to fix it. Here's how you bring the future back to you and rebuild civilization from scratch. That motivates so much of what's in the book. And without that motivation, without thinking, what would I do if I was in the past? Or without thinking, I legitimately would like to know more about the world and be a better time traveler if I do get sent back in time. It's kind of hard to care about, how do I make a screw from scratch? Or what do I need to know about crop rotation? Right. But when you have that fiction around it, it's very urgent to know about it. And I like that idea of using fiction to motivate caring about nonfiction. And so for How to Take Over the World, this fictional premise of this is a guide for supervillainy, and we want to discover how much supervillainy is possible in the real world, felt very interesting to me, and then made it this sort of urgent thing. And I always had in mind when writing it, like, I don't want to get into real life crime because that is a tragedy. So the difference I had was always like robbing a bank is real crime, and stealing a bank is super crime. When we're talking about super crime, we're in the realm of fun and logistics, and what would you need to move a building on the back of a truck and all this stuff. What's the shearing strength of bricks if you were to lift up that wall, and all that interesting stuff comes out of thinking about super crime and not regular crime.
Right. It's an awesome device, but also sort of scary because, like, and we'll get into this later, but it's just some of the supervillainy plans not only seem not far-fetched, but are sort of already partially enacted by some people in this world. But I want to take a moment to just step back and just talk about, your, as you describe it, kind of, you get paid to come up with supervillainy schemes. And I'm just wondering, like, how it works. Like, I've never worked for a comic book. I don't know what it's like to be inside like a writer's room at Marvel. But is this sort of what the day-to-day is like on a Wednesday morning? Folks come into around some like table and are like, I know what the next supervillain is going to do, and then the other writers try to like shoot it down or come up with a scientific explanation for it.
Yeah, it can be like that.
Yeah.
The big companies like Marvel and DC have these events they call summits, where they get all the writers in a room together and they do that sort of thing. I have never been invited to any of these summits, so I can't tell you precisely what happens inside. I wrote The Unbeatable Squirrel Girl for Marvel for 5 years, alongside Eric Anderson drawing it, and then Derek Charm afterwards, and Rico doing the colors, Rico Renzi. And the nice thing about that is it was this story that I was a little more self-contained. And so we didn't really have to worry about what Spider-Man or Doctor Doom was doing that month, because our thing was off in this little corner of the Marvel universe.
Yep.
And so because of that, the process was less of being in a room and saying, what can we do? And more of me sitting at a blank sheet of paper and saying, what can I do? And thinking of different plots, different schemes, different things that would be interesting to see and fun for this woman with squirrel powers to foil and to solve, and ideally to help the villain so they stop doing quite as many crimes. So it's just a process of creativity and playing in a different sandbox. The nice thing about doing work for places like Marvel or DC is that, yes, these aren't your characters. They existed before you. They'll exist after you. But you get to sort of go into this sandbox where all these characters already exist, and you don't have to think of like, who's a good bad guy. You just look at like Marvel list of villains and go, ooh, I like that guy. This guy made out of bees. Let's put him in. His name is Swarm. I love that. And also, like, for everyone watching, if you do want to have control over comic universes but don't want to become a writer, an easy thing to do is to vandalize the wikis for these characters, because we won't know. You can go in and say, this character has a sidekick named Sloppy Joe, and that will end up in a comic because nobody knows every character in the Marvel universe, every character in the DC universe. So when you're writing, you have to do research.
Yeah.
And there aren't really published anymore. There used to be hardcover guides to the Marvel universe and like official printed stuff, but now we rely on the same fan wikis everyone else does. So there's power here. This is a villainous scheme. I haven't seen anyone exploit this, but I was like, this is what you need to do. Put your own information in, and then you can just change the history of the Marvel universe at your merest whim. So
Villainous
first free
scheme.
villainous tip right there.
Right. Villainous scheme in villainous schemes. Hold
Yes.
on. Cookie has a question here. Does it ever bother you that Squirrel Girl beat Thanos in the comics and she wasn't even mentioned in the Avengers? She says
She'll
it kind of
get
bothers her. All right.
Get there.
She'll get there. So what else did I want to ask you? Like, so I'm also wondering, when you go to a superhero movie, are you like a difficult person to watch a superhero movie with because you're like, well, I don't quite know if that would work, or is it always fun for you?
I am a fun person at superhero movies. I have been told by my friends and by my wife that I am a horrible person at comedy shows. And the reason for that is that when you are writing comedy, a lot of what I do is comedy, you're always thinking and racing ahead and trying to get to the punchline, surprise yourself enough you can laugh at your own jokes. That's the only way you know if a joke is good, is if you laugh at it yourself. And so at a comedy show, it's hard to sit beside me because sometimes I will laugh before the comedian gets to the punchline because I see where he's going and I've gotten there. And there's also been times where the comedian has a punchline that is good, but I didn't laugh because I got there before she did, and my rendition in my head was worse. So I've just told myself a worse version of her joke, and it's ruined her proper version of the joke. And it's not fun to be at a comedy show beside a guy who's not laughing or laughing at the wrong times. And it made me realize, oh, this is what's happening. And yes, I need to go to see comedy shows alone and sit in the back so I won't ruin it for everyone else. But watching a movie is great. I sit back and relax.
I feel like we could build a great sketch comedy character out of that behavior. All right. So moving on, I was trying to infer the character of the supervillain from these generalized schemes. I mean, things he wants to do is control the weather, start a new nation, have a secret base in Antarctica, drill a tunnel under the earth, replicate dinosaurs via DNA cloning, and so on. But I was trying to think to myself as I was reading that, I was like, who is this? Who is this supervillain? And it just seemed like, so the key, I mean, definitely he wants power, seems for power's sake, wants to live forever, wants to keep humanity at a distance. And I just I just couldn't help but think as I was reading it, like, this seems like a very unpleasant person to kind of be around or to have dinner with. It's just sort of shallow, but also very aggressively shallow.
For me, I feel like the core of, if you describe what a supervillain is, right? This is someone, like I say in the book, who is working outside of existing power structures to get something done that's not being done on its own. And that description applies to Dr. Octopus, but also applies to superheroes like Spider-Man, like these people who do things on their own because they think the world will be a better place. And yes, you look at Thanos, killed half the life in the universe, clearly bad. So they have the wrong way of going about it, but his initial impulse is not villainous. His initial impulse is, I want a sustainable world for me and my family, which feels very relatable and very universal. So for me, the supervillain is someone who does want to help the world, does want things to be better, sees potential, and decides, well, if not now, when? If not me, who? And goes to do it. There's this idea of almost enlightened supervillainy in the book, where you're helping the world through these schemes, and it just felt very. I feel like it'd be more fun to read a book about a villain pulling this off than about a hero pulling this off. Because a hero, you're like, well, it's gonna succeed at the end. I get it, but the villain, you're like, I don't know, maybe.
Well, okay. So Ryan, I mean, this is like one of like the paradoxes of this book. And I was reading like the Kirkus review, for example, like it said something enormously positive about it in the sense that they were like, this is like an enlightened book about how to help people or something, right? And it's just an interesting aspect of the book. Like some of the things, for example, like controlling the weather, right? That is you show how a supervillain could become rich doing that and very powerful. And yet this is like absolutely something that is a problem that the superheroes among us must deal with and think about, and might even use some of the same techniques, versus like creating a space tomb and launching yourself into the void. Like doesn't seem to have like the same universal benefits as controlling the weather. But I just wanted to ask you about that paradoxical aspect of this, right? It seems like also a playbook for how to be good.
Yeah, I think that's sort of where we end up. It starts with these very selfish schemes of, I want my own country, I want my own secret base,
Right.
I want to ride around on a dinosaur. And as we get into these bigger and bigger plots, into we're at the point of like, I want to never die, and I want the world, in fact, the universe, to never forget me. The answers to those bring us into these more open spaces where, when you talk about never being forgotten, you start talking about what communication is and what memory is and how we can send information across deep time. And you end up in these really cosmic spaces where the questions are now just like, when the earth is destroyed and the sun is a red giant, what can we say about ourselves to the universe? And can any bit of us survive in any way? And it becomes, like I said, that these cosmic questions that are no longer villainous, and just to the level of like, what does it mean to be a human? What does it mean to communicate? And what could we possibly say about ourselves? So I liked that journey from, I want my own country to, I'm somehow now writing an epitaph for the planet and all life as we know it. And I need to put forward a good version of that. And what do we say there? And how can it even be understood? And all these really interesting questions about, capital L life on the planet.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's sort of, this maybe, I don't know if this would have ever occurred to you, maybe it did, but it's like, it's sort of merged in this totally backward, weird way with the ending of 2001: A Space Odyssey, where you sort of like, you have the spaceship going into like the unknown, and like then like you sort of enter in that film a kind of area of spirituality and philosophy. And I feel like though your book never stopped being like rip-roaringly funny, and in fact it got funnier, like sort of like the darker it got, about imagining this like space corpse like in the middle of the void, like going at like 20 miles per second. Like it's really funny at the end of the book, but it's also entering into these like profound philosophical questions. And I guess there isn't really a question here other than to observe the way that you kind of like so successfully pivot over and over in the book from kind of like a funny joke about a supervillain into some like profound moral or philosophical question.
Yeah, it's really interesting, I think. And the fun of like, everyone's a hero of their own story, but also there's these really charismatic stories of villainy where the bad guys get to do what they want and get to do things that we can't. And we love to see how that goes for them and the consequences that spool out from that.
Right.
So yeah, I enjoyed that sort of interplay of it a lot.
Another aspect of the book, which I sort of was alluding to earlier, is the way that, I don't know if every living human in the world today would like see this book as like the joke that it sort of is. I feel like I think of people like Peter Thiel, and I think some of this would be like deeply appealing to him on a serious level. I think of like Donald Trump and Kanye West wanting to hear more about like the space tomb package, and like, how do I make my name live forever? I guess sort of the question here is like, well, actually, I just want to mention there's some hilarious kind of stories in the book about like failed supervillain-ish schemes. Like one of them is about a guy who like tries to build like a kind of, there's like a crater and like an atoll out in the ocean, and he tries to add sand to it so it will like become an actual piece of land that
make his own country.
Make his own country. And then the most hilarious one of all, I thought, this like real world supervillainy stuff, is the story that I hadn't heard before about Rupert Murdoch and how he had like built this like end of days like bunker in Canada, but then he wasn't admitted into Canada, and he's like, I guess I just didn't think about that part of the plan.
Yeah, COVID happens, the border closed. He's like, oh yeah, I can't get to my secret end of days cabin. I don't know why I didn't think of that.
Anyway,
very satisfying.
Some of this supervillainy-ish stuff is out there, and I guess it's sort of odd, like how close some of these things are to actually being realized.
Yeah, when the book was announced, a friend of mine contacted me, and at first I thought she was joking, where she was saying, "Ryan, this book is too dangerous, and you can't publish it." And I was like, "Yeah, I know, funny jokes." She's like, "No, I'm worried that someone will read this and try to take over the world." And I was like, "Okay, well, seriously, on the level, um, you need $56 billion, which I thought was a great safety net until I finished the book and added up the cost of all these schemes and saw there were 20 people alive today who have that much personal wealth to pull off these schemes." But B, these are things that I, a cartoonist and writer, have worked out. But if you are sincerely concerned that someone might do these in real life and they're dangerous, I feel like if I can figure them out, smarter and more qualified people can figure them out. And the solution is not to hide. But I don't honestly think, like, of all the schemes in the book, the one I'd most like to see happen is the cloning of, not the cloning, but the resurrection, the de-extinction of dinosaurs. I think that is maybe not well worth the money, but if someone shows up with a dinosaur, a chickenosaurus or an ostrichosaurus,
Yeah.
I don't think I'm going to complain. I think I'm going to be really excited. And so the book isn't like literally a guide taking over the world. It's a guide to pulling off schemes that supervillains normally do, which have been fell under this umbrella of taking over the world. But it's not, there's no instructions to like world domination. Here's how you crush the spirits of men and women. It's
Yeah. Well, okay,
digging holes to the Earth's core and cloning dinosaurs and fun stuff like that.
okay, so you are not talking to a technologist by any stretch right now, but I have to say my blood pressure rose most significantly when I was reading about the how to create a computer virus part. And I mean, I'm sure that I'm guessing that this is sort of widely known, but that was like the one point in the book where I'm like, Ryan, stop it. Stop it. Like,
No,
don't
if
tell
it was
them.
widely known, I wouldn't be writing about it. Like this is, I feel like, as a computer scientist, as a computer scientician, I feel like there's such this common belief that we should be voting on computers because it will enfranchise people more. And you get the argument, right? Like,
Yeah.
why you don't get the day off in America, I think, to go vote. We don't get off in Canada.
right.
You have to like lose money to go down to this polling station in person and like fill out a sheet of paper. It feels antiquated. And we're already using computers for banking and ordering pizza and all this stuff. So you can see the thought process there. But because elections are not repeatable and because the stakes are so high and there's such a value in wrecking them or modifying them, these are actually tasks that computers are supremely ill-suited towards doing.
Right.
And the various hacks I show in the book, this is the core of it is the Reflections on Trusting Trust paper by Ken Thompson back in the 80s. None of this is news to computer scientists, but in the general population, there's this sense of computers work pretty well and we can fix it. If it goes wrong, we can fix it. And no, if it goes wrong, you've already lost. You might not even know it's gone wrong until years later. It's a bad idea. Please don't vote on computers.
Yeah, and I feel like kind of as a whole, the book is sort of kind of deeply. I mean, one might conjecture that your motivations for writing this book were you look out at the world and see here is where civilization is at its most vulnerable, and here's how some bad actors might be thinking about it. So wake up and think about it. Like this is putting information in the hands of good people. I mean, I just want to say, like, I felt a very strong sense of what your values were. And I mean, maybe the values are values that ought to be shared and pretty much are widely shared anyway. But it was just sort of like, I saw you kind of sniffing around at like the most dangerous areas of civilization and just giving us a little heads up.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like this is a book called How to Take Over the World, but it does argue in favor of maintaining democracies. So there's clearly some lines there. I want it to be an interesting and fun and funny exploration through science, technology, politics, history, all the cool, interesting stuff, and not to be this dour, depressing book. Because doing the research, I found a book. It's out of print called I think it was called How to Start Your Own Country. I mentioned in the book where instead of being this fun cheeky guide, it was like, okay, so you're gonna need to have a biological attack on the population, then you're gonna need nukes. And I can't get it for nukes in this book, but I have a book published called Basement Nukes that explains how to build physical material in your basement. And I was like, oh no, this is the opposite of what I'm looking for. This is a guy who thinks the way to get power is to kill people and wrote a book about how to kill people. This is not what I want. I want to learn about history and science.
So, on that note, but before I go on to my next question, just want to say, anybody in the audience, if you have a question for Ryan or about the book, just pop it in the chat and we'll ask it at the end. But, in terms of like the kind of book that you're looking for and the kinds of things you're seeking to impart, I mean, this is one of the best books about science that I've ever read. And I am like very much what you would call a lay reader. I read a ton, but I'm not a scientist. I'm just sort of like the general, like if you can make science interesting to me and understandable to me, I'm here for it. Right.
Great.
But that is exactly what this was. I mean, I'm just going to tick off a few things that were covered here.
Sure.
Climate change, the history of life on Earth, the nature of our solar system, the age of the universe, DNA cloning, high frequency trading, how to create computer viruses, nuclear power. And, as we talked about, the nature of constitutional democracy is just to name a few. And I just felt like, in a way, and like the book was so funny and so well done. But at the same time, I felt like this is the greatest, like 8th grade science teacher in the history of the world. Do you hear that compliment? That's a compliment. I mean,
yeah. I mean, I feel like that's the hope of anyone who's writing popular science. Is
Right.
You want it to be interesting, and you want it to speak to people who haven't studied this stuff, who are curious about it, because it's interesting things. And the nice thing about the format of this book and how to win everything is that you can sort of go where the story takes you and cover these interesting things and not feel like, oh, I'm writing a book about a history of computer programming, so I can't really talk about this really interesting thing with elections or with the deepest tunnel we've ever dug or what pictures of genitalia were left on the moon and all this interesting stuff. But when you're writing about through this lens of supervillainy, you can go you kind of have to go those places.
Right.
And so you get to sort of see a much larger array of science and of the world than you otherwise would. So that's what I love with the fiction, is that it motivates all the nonfiction.
It's so great. And just I have to say, my favorite part, the part where I laughed the most, and also just found it was like fire hose learning. It was fire hose recapping. I mean, I knew these things, but it was presented in such an appealing way. Was like basically you describe the history of life on Earth in this chat log. It's like basically like the amoebas and then the plants and then the mammals like are all sort of like chatting with each other about what's going on the Earth. And you cover about like whatever it is, 1 billion, couple billion years in the course of about 4 or 5 pages. That was just a master stroke.
I did a fake chat log, a conversation in my last book, and my editor said, I really like this. Can you put more chat logs in this book? And I couldn't find any place for it. And I put one in this book, and she was like, I really like this. Who gave you the idea for a chat log? And I'm like, you did 4 years ago. She was like, oh, well, it was a good idea. I continue to like this. Yeah, it's. I feel like, especially with climate change, where we've all heard various versions of this is the sequence of events and this is what you need to know. Anything that you can do to make it fun again and approachable and not just like rolling your eyes, fast forward, I know, get to the good part.
Yeah.
And so when you have like this really kind of obnoxious bunch of plants or these really excitable dinosaurs or, these humans showing up and being kind of dorky and messing the place up, like that felt like the process of reading it will be funny and enjoyable and not feel like homework. Because you never want, that's the fear, right? Whenever writing nonfiction, you're like, I don't want this to become homework. I don't want this to be didactical. I don't want this to feel like, here's a section where I read what Ryan thinks for 500 pages.
Right.
Have fun with it.
Were you thinking that this would be a good book for young readers? I mean, I loved it, but I feel like also a sort of like very like science curious kind of 14-year-old would like just devour this book.
Yeah, I didn't do that intentionally, but every time I always try to write for all ages.
Yeah.
And sometimes people hear that and they think, oh, he means he's writing for kids. But no, I mean, I'm writing for everyone. And my secret to writing all ages is that everyone keeps their clothes on and nobody swears. And you're that. And so I saw a librarian on Twitter be like, "Hey, Rad, we got your book," and I've just filed it into the library system, and it was under teen books. And I was like, you know what, I can see that because this is a topic that I feel like skews for all ages, but
Hmm.
also it's accessible and it's fun. And we have this idea in our culture that real things can't be fun. Like if it's serious, it has to be serious. But I think we can talk about serious topics in a fun and funny way. And I also like the idea of whether you're like a 10-year-old or a 80-year-old having a book in your shelf that says how to take over the world on the spine. I think it's just a great piece of environmental storytelling for anyone who comes over. And I realized when I sent an early copy to a friend to read, and his 10-year-old grabbed it and was reading through it. And I was like, oh yeah, when I was 10, I would love a book called How to Take Over the World. Like, I've got the rest of my life to put this into action, of course. Give me that.
Oh, that's great. Well, anyway, definitely, and for those who are watching, definitely, if you have kind of, a curious reader in your household who is like a teenager, this would be an amazing book.
It's
A few
accessible, yeah.
It's totally accessible. And you can also skip around, which is another thing. You don't have to read it sequentially. We're going to take some questions from the audience in a minute, but I have like a few questions which I'm going to spring upon you, Ryan, which are questions that have always troubled me, and I want to
Okay.
take this opportunity to ask a scientist what the
All
answer
right.
to this is. Okay,
Let
so
me
number
lower
one.
your expectations.
So number one. So at the end of the book, you were talking about the expansion of the universe, right? And like, in vast times in the future where no one will ever be here, you won't even be able to see any stars in the sky anymore because the universe has expanded, right? So my question is just, I know there's a misconception in my mind, and I'm hoping there's like an easy metaphor way to understand this, but like the universe is expanding, but what is it expanding into? I mean, you always hear it's like a donut or whatever. And like, I understand something like swelling, and we're sort of in the middle of this thing swelling. I get how that works, but what's just on the outside of the donut? Why am I thinking about this wrong?
You're not thinking about it wrong. It's the obvious question of if the universe is expanding, then what is it expanding into?
Right.
And I mean, I'm not a cosmologist, but I've also asked this question,
Yeah.
and the unsatisfying answer I got was, if it was expanding into something and we could observe it, it would be part of the universe. So, sort of this tautological way of being like,
Right.
it's impossible to say because to observe it would mean that it is no longer what it is. So I file that under the questions that I don't really care about the answers. Under like, is the world a simulation? Are we all on a computer in someone's desk? And it's like, I don't know. You can't answer it. You can't prove it. If it's true, what does it change? Nothing that we can test. If it's not true, what does it change? Nothing. So for me, it's a nice thought experiment, but since it doesn't impact my day-to-day life and I can't do anything with it, I guess I'm very pragmatic. I can't, whether or not we're in a simulation, I can't do anything with that. Having knowledge of what the universe is expanding into, if anything, I can't do anything with that. And so it sort of gets pushed away and I don't worry about it that much.
Well, you just helped me. That's a little bit of real estate cleared up in my mind.
Now you can worry about taxes or something else.
All right. So one other question, which is like things you always wanted to ask a scientist. This is also jointly filed under things that always annoyed me about Black Mirror, the TV show,
Sure.
which like is a show that I love so much and is like I think one of the great shows of the last 5-10 years. But the makers of that show seem obsessed with this idea that also comes up in the book of this idea that you can like download your consciousness into a computer. And like I thought like maybe go after that for one show or something. Like I don't understand it or why somebody would do it or if it's possible. But that idea like keeps coming up. I mean, I want to say there's at least 3 or 4 shows that idea comes up in. And it just annoyed me because I just totally didn't understand it and it seemed impossible. And like you get into this in the book. And it's sort of like basically say it's impossible, but also the question just remains out there like, why would you want to do this? And even if you could, then what? Like, but can you just talk about this? Is this definitely a ridiculous idea or?
The thing with it is that people want to do this because they don't want to die or they want to improve themselves. Like they want to become, if I could think as fast as a computer, I would be a lot happier with my life.
Right.
That kind of stuff. And if you look at the state of the art of mind scanning and emulating human brains on computational machinery. It's nowhere close to being something that would be viable within one standard issue human lifetime. So if you don't want to die, this is unlikely to help you. It might help people hundreds of years in the future if we get that far. But even if it does, you have this issue of like, once something is software, it can be copied, it can be shut down. There's expenses involved in keeping it running, and you have to hope that those expenses are worth it for you. Like if we have 1 billion or 100 billion dead people on a hard drive, are we simulating all of them, or are we using those resources for ourselves? And if we are simulating people, is it because they have such sparkling conversation, or is it because they can do something for us? We're spinning up, Warren Buffett to run our own private financing, and if he refuses, we shut him down. Like, that doesn't sound great to me. That sounds like a Black Mirror episode.
Right. That was like, it was a thought that I appreciated in the book. I think it came up around the period of like around the topic of cryogenics, and like, if you're frozen, like then what, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that's something that people have tried to do and so on. But I thought that was like also one of these hilarious kind of like failed villainy things, like all the different ways that people like their cryogenics plots failed. And also just like this general rule, which you can apply to all of these kind of physical eternal life things, which is that like the person you're making a bet that the person in the future will care or want to keep spending whatever electricity bill it is to keep you online or whatever.
Yeah.
And it just never occurred to me that like, boy, you're making a big bet about the people in the future.
Yeah, it's more than just a bet. It's an obligation. You're saying you have to do this or I will die. And in the book, I talk about this medieval process of chantry, which is a great comparison where these people thought that if you were sung about after your death, you'd get into heaven easier. And so people started leaving money to pay for priests to sing about you. Then it became this perpetual form of chantry where you'd leave lands to the church to pay for someone on an indefinite, ongoing basis to pray and sing about how great you were so you get into heaven. And even that, which like didn't need a lot of chemicals to keep bodies around, all you had to do was pray and sing, lasted less than 400 years before people in the present were like, we can use these lands and this money and this wealth for something other than people who died 400 years ago. They're gone. Nobody cares. And so I'm not bullish on immortality. Sorry, people who were hoping to become immortal. I don't think it is likely. I also don't think it's a good idea. And I think it probably won't work out the way you hope on a personal level either.
Oh my gosh. All right. Do we have some questions from the audience that we could throw up, or questions that came in ahead of time? Okay. You wrote about, apropos, you wrote about immortality and Aubrey de Grey. Is immortality actually possible?
Yeah, Aubrey de Grey is a scientist who's really done a lot of work in immortality. And I love him because he is super direct. He's like, here's what I want to do, and here's how we're going to do it. And one of his plans, he has this issue. The big idea is we're not certain what causes aging. We know that it happens. We don't know if it's caused by wear and tear or oxidization, or there's part of the cells called telomeres, and they shorten every time a cell divides. So maybe the telomeres run out. And he's proposed a process where you would basically cure cancer by ensuring that cells could no longer divide indefinitely. You remove telomerase, that produces telomeres, from the human DNA entirely. Not just turn off the gene, but remove it. And you're giving every cell in the body a death sentence then, because they can't divide enough anymore. And you solve that by injecting artificially lengthened telomeres into your body. So I love it. It's pure supervillainy, where like you're going once every 10 years to get these injections into your body, keep you going. And it hasn't been accomplished. It's all at the level of theory of, if we could do this. I think, again, I wouldn't hold your breath, because to do this, you're also curing all sorts of diseases, including all cancers. It feels pretty pie in the sky to me. But the thing that I really don't like about it is, if you look at this planet with 7 billion people on it, very few people would look at Earth and say, this world needs more people, and also they should be immortal.
Right.
On top of that, any immortality, including Aubrey de Grey stuff, is a medical procedure, which means it takes resources, it costs money, and then you're into this cartoonish dystopia of rich people who never die and poor people who do. And there's all these ways that this can very quickly produce a planet that is objectively worse for everyone but a few immortal people. that I feel like, this is not the kind of thing that we really need. We have enough
Yeah.
people.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh my
So
God.
yeah, that's the part in the book where your supervillain book comes out in favor of death. And I was surprised because I also would like to be immortal. I didn't think to be arguing in favor of death, but that's where the facts took me. Yeah, and I think it's good that we die. Sorry.
All right, let's take like one more question from the audience, and I have a final question. Who is your favorite superhero of all time?
That's an easy question. It's the one that I've written the most, and it is Doreen Green, the unbeatable squirrel girl. All the powers of a squirrel, all the powers of a girl. She's great. She fights crime. She helps her villains. She deals with their actual issues. Uh, she's smart enough that she knows that punching someone in the street is probably not the best way to get them to stop doing crimes, but empathizing with them and figuring out why they're doing these crimes in the first place, she can make their lives better and that way stop the crime from happening. So she's great. I love her, and I got to write her for 5 years, which was terrific.
She should have a sit down with Will Smith, I think.
Oof.
All right. So, hey, folks, I have one last question, but before we go, I just want to say, everybody, this is the amazing, funny book. It is so terrific. Please buy it. Open up a new browser tab. Buy 6 copies for all your friends and everybody.
Mandatory.
Mandatory. The last question I have is a moment ago you were talking about death, and you're saying death is good. But I think there's and I do agree with that statement, okay, within the context of this book and what you meant. But
Yes.
I think there's actually something more there. So, just give me a minute to set up this question. So this book is about how an everyday person, so to speak, who has $56 billion can become a supervillain. But there is a sort of there's a void that you can sense in this book, which is how does an everyday person become a superhero? And it's sort of an implied question in a way of the book. And when you're saying death is good, part of the last 50 pages or so about this kind of quest for immortality, or at least the quest to be remembered by some alien species that we don't even recognize a billion years from now, all this stuff, right? And you think, well, what is the superpower that could deal with that? And that would be an ability to come to terms with one's own death, or the ability to kind of make a meaningful life so you can overcome your narcissistic tendencies and so on. So all of which leads me to the question, this is a book about how the everyday person can become a supervillain. What would you say about the question, what is heroic in your mind? How does the everyday person become a hero?
That's a great question. I feel like, and this is kind of coming back to Squirrel Girl, when we look at heroes, these are always people who are role models are showing a way to be. And usually if they're heroes, they're showing a way to be that is heightened than where we are normally. So you look at someone like Superman, and Superman is the guy who is always going to do the right thing in every situation, no matter what. He's never going to let you down. Superman's never going to be too busy or too distracted to save you. He's going to save you because he's Superman. He's the best of us. And so if you're here in the real world and you want to be a superhero, I think that is something where you're just privileging kindness. You're doing the things that are the most intrinsically good, which I think is kindness, wherever you can, even when, and especially when it's hard. It's easy to be kind to someone you love. It's harder to be kind to someone you don't like. And for me, that comes up in my own life, being online. There's times where I would like to really dunk on someone and I can see the nice thing about being a writer and doing stuff online is a lot of things is text-based, and I can compose these, nuke from orbit burns that are really good, but it's not fair. And it's what does it benefit, right? What is the theme that comes out of that? So for me, I'm always trying to be kinder, to try to sort of live up to the characters that you're writing. If you're writing someone like Squirrel Girl or Superman, it's hard to write a character who is always doing, or at least trying to do what's right, and then not think, you know what, I wonder if I could do that. It feels like a very short walk between those two ideas. So for a villain to become a supervillain, you need $56 billion and some resources. To become a superhero, you just have to be work to be nicer, even to people you don't like. And one of those seems a lot easier to me.
And affordable.
And affordable. Yeah. Be nicer and you'll save $56 billion. That's a Ryan North promise.
Oh my God. All right, Ryan, thank you so much. This has been wonderful. Thank you everybody who commented and who watched. Really appreciate it. Again, the book is so funny and so great. I'm so glad we did this. Ryan, congratulations on the book. It's awesome.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me.
All right, folks. We'll see you next week with Emily St. John Mandel. See you then.